Hello all my fishy friends and welcome back to another fun, exciting, and educational addicted fishing tutorial. Today's lesson is going to include absolutely everything you need to know to be successful using these little bad boys right here, from the rod, reel, line, all the way down to every spinner that I like to use. Let's go have some fun. So the first bit we're going to start with is the rod selection. The two rods that I religiously use the most to fish spinners for really any species, whether it be salmon, steelhead, or trout, are these two bad boys right here. The one that I have in my left hand here has to be my favorite of all time. This is the 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗣 𝗦𝗥𝗘𝗪 Pro 9-foot, 8 to 17 pound rod. The most important factor when you're picking out a rod is the length and the action of that fishing rod. I like this 8 to 17 pound because it has a nice soft tip, it has a really stiff backbone, and it has a lot of sensitivity. It's very important that you stick with about an 8.5 foot rod up to a 9.5 foot rod, just for the fact of sensitivity and being able to feel your spinner as you fish it through the water column. We're gonna go and take these rods once we get it all rigged up and show you guys how to set up to do this style of fishing, and then we're gonna go and show you guys exactly how you wanna use these spinners to effectively fish certain water to try to catch the biggest steelhead of your life. The reel that I like to pair this rod with is the C40 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗣 reel. I really like this thing, especially in the C40 size. You can use anywhere from a 30 series or a 3000 up to a 40 series or a 4000. And I like the 40 series or the 4000 mainly because the amount of line that I can put on this. When you're stuck on the bank or when you're fishing a spinner, you want to be able to have enough line to fight a fish. What tends to happen if you use a smaller reel is when you do hook a big fish, you don't have as much line to play that fish on, and you end up getting spooled and have a story for the rest of your life. So I like the C40 𝗪𝗟 or the 4000 series. I'm gonna slide this bad boy onto the rod, making sure that it's nice and tight on there because we do not want the reel falling off. That is the nice part about the grips on these 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗣 𝗦𝗥𝗘𝗪s is they're very sturdy. They get a nice tight grip on that reel. Now before I go ahead and put line on this reel and get this thing ready to fish, I'm going to talk about our other rod selection, and that is the 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗥𝗗 rod. Now this rod is in the bait casting model, which is a little bit harder to learn if you're just beginning fishing. But I have to say, as you graduate in your fishing skill and you start to be better at casting and reading water, there is a lot more sensitivity that comes out of a bait casting setup just by the way it sits in your hand, the way you can float that through, and the fact that this is an X series rod. These things are extremely light, extremely sensitive, and perfect for swinging spoons and spinners. Now this rod comes in a 9 to 9.5 foot range as well. This is a 932, 8 to 17 pound 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗥𝗗 rod in the bait casting model. A very, very good option if you're gonna graduate up into a little bit higher skill level of swinging spinners. But for now, let's get this rod ready. Now when it comes to the reel, it's very important to go higher quality rather than lesser. What happens when you buy a lower quality reel is it has less bearings, it's going to be harder to cast, and it won't have as many adjustments to actually get you the right amount of tension on your line when you cast these spinners, which can sometimes be difficult. But the reel I'm pairing this rod with today is the 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗃 Helios reel. It's one of my absolute favorites and it works very well for casting these lures. Now in my opinion, one of the most important factors of setting up this rod and reel for spinner fishing is your line selection. I like to use a high-vis line, and I think it's very important to use a braided line. The reason that being is because there's no stretch and there is a lot of sensitivity in a braided line on a spinner setup. So what I have here today is an Addicted Enforcer braid made by Tough Line. You can see this stuff is extremely high-vis orange, and I'm gonna go with a 30-pound braided line here today. The reason I'm going to use that 30-pound test is because I want my line to be able to cut through the current and get down into the strike zone as it's fishing. This line is designed to float. This is what we use for our float rods when we're doing a lot of bobber fishing and whatnot, but I like to use a smaller diameter line, anywhere from about a 20-pound up to a 40-pound, and get my spinner in the face of those fish. Let's put this line on. So for those of you out there watching who have never put line on a reel, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes, but there's a couple tricks that I'm going to show you that could really simplify it. What I'm going to do first is throw that line on the ground. I'm going to run the end of my line through the very first guide on my rod. There's no need to go through all the guides. It's a pain in the butt, and it's not going to really speed up this process at all. The next step that's easy to miss is to open the bail. Okay, now for the hardest part of this whole process. A lot of times people will add a little piece of tape to the base of that reel so that your line can actually grab onto it. But what I like to do in a situation like this, where we're out here on the water, we're trying to get set up and go fishing, I'm gonna make 3 wraps around my spool. Now that I've done my 3 wraps, I'm gonna take that bitter end, wrap it over my main line that's going back out of my guide, bring it back onto itself, the actual line that's coming off of the spool, and I'm just gonna do your typical fisherman's knot. This can be a little bit difficult, but I'm gonna do my best to show you guys. This is the line coming off the reel. This is the line going back to the spool of line that's sitting on the ground. I'm gonna take that, wrap it around my main line going back to the spool 5 or 6 times. I'm gonna stick that tag end back through the line that I've created, that little loop, and there we have it. Okay, now where I'm at is I have a couple wraps around my spool once again. I've tied that clinch knot onto the main line. Now I'm just gonna pull that thing tight, until it cinches down tight onto that spool. Make sure to get that thing as tight as you can without breaking it. And there we have it. We're ready to put line on our reel. Close that bail. Next and very important step is run your line along that roller. Hold it in your fingers just above the reel, right up to that first eye, and then slowly start to spool that line up on your reel. Now it's hard to tell, but I'm keeping just enough tension to make sure that line doesn't go onto that spool loose. What's gonna happen to you if you put the line on too loose is when you make that first cast of the day, all that loose line that's underneath that main line that's on the edge of the spool is gonna fly off, and you're gonna have a big rat's nest on your first cast of the day, and nobody likes to start like that. So I have about a pound of pressure on my fingers. I'm kind of pulling it tight and just slowly putting that line along the spool. And there we have it. About 125 yards is what this spool is going to take in that 40 series reel. We're ready to go to the next step. Okay, now it's time to run your line through the rest of your guides. And a little old timer trick that I like to use is I take my line with about a 9-inch tag end, fold it over, and put that looped end through each guide. What that does for me is that if my line gets caught or it slips out of my fingers, it doesn't all fall back through my guides and I have to start the process all over again. Very important to make sure to hit each guide, because there's nothing more irritating than running your line through and realizing when on your first cast that you missed one. All right, there we go. We got them all, didn't miss any. Now it's time for the last step. Now, my last step in this process, other than choosing my spinner, is gonna be to add a fluorocarbon bumper. Now this is the very, very important part of this setup and to effectively fish a spinner. Why we're gonna use this fluorocarbon bumper is because obviously our braided line is extremely high vis. And we want that so that we can effectively fish, but to counteract that high vis line, we don't wanna spook the fish, so we're gonna add a clear line, like a 15-pound tough line fluorocarbon to the end of it, about 6 to 8 feet. Usually I like to go, that's about 9 feet. We're going 9 feet today. But you wanna use a good enough length so that that fluorocarbon line can sink down, get away from your braided line, and effectively fish down in the strike zone without intruding on the fish. Now, you guys are probably wondering, how in the heck are we gonna attach these two lines together? There is a multitude of knots that you can use as a uni knot to put these things together. The one I like is called a blood knot. There's, again, many ways to do this. I like to say, do the one that you're best at tying. Go online, do some research, go down into our tips and tricks page here on our YouTube channel, and we have plenty of knot tutorials on how to do these uni knots, but the one I'm gonna show you today is a blood knot. I like to say, do the one you're best at tying, because that's the one you have confidence in, and that's the one that's probably not gonna break. So to start this knot, I'm gonna take both ends of my line. I like to have my braided line in my left hand and my fluorocarbon in my right. What I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take my line, I'm gonna cross them up just like so, with about 6 inches sticking out each end. After I've crossed those two lines, I'm gonna take my braided line, and with my fingers, I'm gonna wrap this braided line 7 times around my fluorocarbon line. Once I've got those 7 wraps, I'm gonna hold that entire setup in my right hand, grab my braided line that I've wrapped around my fluorocarbon, and bring it under and in between the 2 lines that I have here. Now that that step's done, I'm gonna take my fluorocarbon line and do the same thing. I'm gonna make 7 wraps along the braided line, take the tag end of my fluorocarbon and stick it back through that little hole that we've left in between the fluorocarbon and the braid. Now, last step that's left is to pull it tight. You see how both those lines have started to grab on themselves. What I like to make sure to do is hashtag wet your knots. I'm gonna get that thing nice and moist. I'm gonna pull it tight. Now, one telltale sign that I've done this knot correctly is that my fluorocarbon is sticking down and my braid is sticking up to opposite sides of that knot. If those two are doing exactly like you see here, you've done it right and you're ready to fish. And now the moment we've all been waiting for, spinner talk. Now in my mind, there's really 3 options when it comes to choosing a spinner, and that is the style of spinner that you're using. What we have is a bell body, we have torpedo body, and we have bullet body. First and probably most popular is our bell body. Second, and probably my favorite option of all, is the torpedo body. And last but not least is our heavy spinner, the bullet body. Now, the most complicated part of all, choosing the spinner to use. The water that I have behind me and where I'm gonna start fishing today and showing you guys how to fish each style of these spinners is gonna dictate which one I'm gonna use. I can tell just by looking at the river, it's probably about 4 to 6 feet deep, pretty swift moving, and so right off the bat, I know I'm not gonna wanna go with a bell body, I'm not gonna wanna go overly heavy with the bullet body, I'm gonna go with the torpedo body spinner. Now for me, the way I usually choose my spinner is given the day and the style of water that I'm fishing. My go-to move is usually as soon as I get to the river, I open up my spinner box and I see which one's talking to me. And what I mean by that is you can see right here. I open up my box and I start looking at all my different colors. One thing I want to look for is which one stands out, which one radiates with the sky color and the watercolor best, and that's usually how I'm going to choose my spinner. The one that stands out to me as soon as I open my box, the one my eyes go to first, that's the one I'm going to grab. And so as I look in my box today, I can obviously see already one of the ones that's standing out the most is this Michael Jackson. You got a black contrast, a little bit of chartreuse, and a silver blade. This is the one I'm going with. Now I don't get too complicated with the knot that I use. You can see that I don't have a swivel on here, and I'm going to explain why as we start fishing. But my knot that I use usually is just your standard clinch knot, 6 or 7 wraps, back through the eye that you've created above the eye of the spinner. Wet your knot, pull her tight, and we're ready to fish. Now you'll notice this spinner doesn't have a hook on it. That's not going to be very effective. And what I'm going to stress now is hook selection. I think it's probably the most important part of this entire setup. If you don't have the proper hook and the proper hook size given the spinner that you're using, you're not going to be able to land as many fish. First thing I'll do when I do buy some new spinners is if they have a treble hook, I'll usually take a pair of wire cutters and I'll cut those hooks off and I'll go straight to my 2/0 Mustad Siwash hook. Now you can see the obvious difference in between a standard hook that you're gonna see like this Big River model and the Mustad Siwash. It's very key to have that hook that has that big wide gap. It has a slight bend to it so that when that fish grabs, turns away with my hook, that thing's gonna bury deep in the side of its cheek and there ain't no way it's coming off. So these hooks, when you buy them out of the package, they have that open eye gap so that you can easily just slide that thing right on the bottom end of your spinner. Take your pliers, make sure to get it nice and deep in the bite of your plier. Pinch it down tight, and we're ready to fish. Now make sure when you do this, you guys, that you don't leave any gap in between that main shank of the hook and that little ring where that Siwash closes. I've had it happen plenty of times where I leave that little bit of a gap, I get lazy, I hook a big fish, off goes the hook, in comes the spinner, and a heartbreak happens. Okay, enough of the jabber, let's go fishing. All right, now what we're looking at here in front of us, guys, is a quintessential spinner spot. What I like about this so far is this riffly nature to it. We have about 3 to about 6 feet of depth all the way across to the very end of the tail out. This is a great spot to fish a spinner because you can cover a lot of water with this presentation. Now the strategy I'm going to stress with every single type of spinner that I show you guys here today is the close, middle, far, 2-step strategy. And the way that's going to work is I'm going to start close, I'm going to cast to the middle, and then I'm going to cast far. The biggest mistake a lot of spinner fishermen make is they walk up to the bank and their first instinct is to cast all the way to the far side. That is the worst thing that you can do in the sense of covering water. We always want to start at the first bit of water that we can't see bottom in front of us. Or in this situation, it's about 3 feet off the bank. So my first cast always is going to be about 15 to 20 feet out, and I'm going to fish that water in close to me first before I start working my way out into the other side of the river. That being the case, I'm looking at this, I have a nice easy current coming down. It's obvious that this side is a little bit deeper, so I'm going to make my first cast 45 degrees upriver. I'm going to immediately reel that tension tight, get my spinner blade spinning, and I'm going to follow it with my rod tip. One thing that you'll notice already with this situation is that I have my rod tip pointed down. That's how you control the depth of your spinner, again, with any style of spinner that you're using. If you point your rod tip to the surface, your spinner is going to come up. If you point your rod tip down, it's going to cause it to sink and go further and further down into the strike zone. So having your rod tip low as you work that spinner through at that 45-degree angle to 45-degree angle is key to getting this thing in the right area where those fish can see it. Now that I made my close cast, I'm going to cast a little bit farther, only about halfway across the river. I'm going to immediately reel that spinner tight, get that blade going, pointing my tip low. And the key to this, again, is to follow your spinner. A lot of people will keep their rod tip in one position and let that spinner swing, and what that does is it takes all your sensitivity away through your braided line into your rod tip. The only way you're going to be able to constantly feel that spinner spinning and be able to tell if you're contacting bottom or even close to the bottom is if you have that line tight and your rod tip pointed in the same direction that your spinner is. Now that I made that middle cast, I'm going to go a little bit farther. Again, as soon as it hits the water, I'm not going to let it sink to the bottom. I'm going to fish it down to the bottom. I got my rod tip pointed at it. I'm reeling just enough to get my blade spinning, and I'm going to swing it in and follow it all the way across, letting it fish down there in the sweet spot. Oh my God, that feels good. This feels good. Now that I've made those 3 casts, I'm going to take 2 big boy steps downriver and I'm going to continue fishing my way down through the run. Now I'm going to start my process all over again, my close, middle, far. I've made those few steps downriver. Now I have a whole new body of water to fish. So my first cast is going to be close, about 15 to 20 feet out there. Rod tip low, engage that spinner. As long as that spinner is spinning, you guys really don't have to reel. You can see in this situation I have enough current that that blade is getting pulled by the current of the river I can keep my rod tip low and just let that thing fish all the way in. Now that I've made my first cast, I'm going to go about halfway across the river. Let that spinner fall, reel my line tight, putting my line down towards the bottom of the river, right at my spinner so I have all that sensitivity. My blade's working, I'm just going to let her swing. Now for the far cast. Now, one key factor I want everybody that's watching to note here is how much water I've just covered by using this method. By doing the close, middle, far, and 2 steps, close, middle, far, and 2 steps, already in about 15 minutes, I've worked from the very top of the hole all the way to mid-hole. The thing about that is the fact that you're covering so much water. That's what's so fun about fishing a spinner, is that you can be very versatile, you can experience the whole river, and it teaches you a lot about where salmon and steelhead lay. So by using that method of the close, middle, far, and the 2 steps, you create a grid pattern working across the hole. Absolutely every bit of water that's available to me has been worked from the top of the hole down to where I'm at now. So I'm going to continue that close, middle, far all the way until I run out of bank, and then I'll be confident at that point that I've effectively fished this entire hole. Got him. It's a good one too. It's a good one. All I had to do was cry about it a little bit. Fish on. Oh, wow. Insane jumpage. Yeah. Another one. Oh, another one. Wow. This fish likes it out of the water much more than he likes it in the water. That's for damn sure. Beautiful little steely. Oh, another one. Jump count. Jump count. Yeah, baby. Look at that. What a creature. Well, it seems we've run out of real estate in this hole. We have no more available bank to fish. We did our close, middle, far technique all the way down. If I was gonna stay faithful to my spinner and was gonna stick around in this hole, I'd go back to the top, change my color, and work it again from top to bottom using that close, middle, far technique. But in the name of education, let's go to the next piece of water. All right, it goes without being said that we obviously have a totally different style of water here behind us now, but still a very, very good spot to fish a spinner. What's gonna change in my approach to this hole is my spinner selection. As you can see, we have a lot of fast water, we have a lot of big boulders, and a lot of structure in the river, so I don't want a spinner that's gonna sink too quickly and ultimately get hung up in that structure on the bottom of the river. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take Old Faithful, I'm sorry, Torpedo, you're being retired, and Bell Body, it's your turn. Time to shine, baby. Now I'm using a similar color. This one has a different colored blade. It's an orange blade instead of a chartreuse, but still the same sort of presentation. Dark body, small profile, big flashy blade with a little bit of color on it. This should work. So as I approach this hole here, I'm gonna fish it a little bit differently. Obviously, we don't have the vastness of water that we need to cover in a spot like this. We have a main channel. We have only a couple different soft spots that these fish are gonna even be able to sit. So I wanna target that specifically. We're not gonna so much do the close, middle, far technique here, as we're gonna make about the exact same distance cast each time. We're still gonna take our 2 big steps downriver after each cast so we can get that grid pattern and cover the entire stretch of water that we have here in front of us. Let's get started. There's only a couple spots that I think these fish could sit. One is gonna be here on the inside, 2 will be over in that far pocket. So my first approach to the hole is gonna cast just to the first bit of water that I can't see the bottom. It'll surprise you guys how often those fish will sit super close to the bank. So in situations like this, stealth can be a virtue. You want to sneak up to the hole, make that first cast on that closest spot that you see, and get that spinner flipping through there, and then start covering the rest of the hole. Let's cast a little bit farther, let that thing sink down, keep my tip low, and I'm going to let the river do the work. I'm going to let that current carry that spinner along, keeping my tip down, making sure I'm nice and close to the bottom. Right about 45 degrees, I'm going to bring it back in. So one point I want to make here is to show you why the bell body spinner is the appropriate spinner to use in this situation. As that thing floats through there, you'll notice that the spinner is actually going slower than the water current. And that's because of all that surface area on that spinner body. All the boils and all the currents are pushing up off of the bottom, ultimately keeping that spinner in position and slowly working that blade through the strike zone. If I was using any other style of spinner, as I'm floating through this run, I wouldn't be able to get that slow presentation. I'd have to reel too much on the spinner. That blade would start spinning too quickly, and ultimately I'd pull it away from the fish before they even got a chance. Okay, so one quick note that I want to make as I'm working down through here, and you guys have seen a difference in my style of fishing. I'm being very religious on making the exact same distance cast each time and slowly swinging that spinner across the strike zone. What I'm doing there is, once again, creating that grid pattern. I'm making sure that I cover every square inch of this run, basically any rock, any bit of structure that those fish could possibly sit behind, and by doing that exact same step each time and making that same distance cast, I'm being sure that I'm not missing any water. One key element here, a tool that will set you above all when you're fishing spinners in particular, is having a good pair of polarized sunglasses. It allows you to see the entire bottom of the river. It allows you to see those definitions in the bottom, and again, target those fish right where their path of least resistance is going to be. Got him! Got him! Ready? Yep. Just a true OP giant. It's not as big as they get, but heck, how can you complain? Well, I feel confident that we covered this water top to bottom. We swept the entire hole with the spinner onto our third style of spinner and our third type of water. Well, here we have it, the perfect bullet body spinner water. The reason we're gonna want this bullet body spinner in this situation is obviously because it's so deep. We have a really hard current coming down, the river splits around this little island, and we have this big deep pocket right here at our feet. The reality of this situation is that no other style of spinner, the bell body or the torpedo body, is gonna be able to cut through that current and get down deep enough to the bottom of the hole to get in front of those fish. So we're gonna switch this bell body out and go over to the bullet body. All right, time to let her fly. So my strategy in a hole like this is going to be much different than anything else we've fished so far. I want to identify where the deepest spot of the hole is and where that current is pushing to get down into that deep spot of the hole. So I'm looking here, I have this hard current coming down. I have a soft pocket on the other side. In that boil and in that little swirl is where my spinner is actually going to get sucked down by the water currents and get down towards the bottom of the river. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cast upriver at about a 45-degree angle, hit that soft water on the far side. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm actually gonna let my spinner sink this time. I'm not gonna fish it to the bottom. I'm gonna keep my line tight, doing a slow reel until I feel that first thump. As soon as I feel that thump, I'm gonna start to reel quickly, get that spinner blade going, and just dredge it through that deep spot of the hole. In this case, we're targeting a steelhead that is down, comfortable in a deep spot in the river, and what we're doing is basically just throwing that lure through there, giving him a chance to see it and to react and come over and grab it. In a hole like this, these fish have a lot of room to travel and grab your spinner. In a situation like what we fished just before with the bell body, that thing's moving past them super quickly. So what I want to do here is basically just try to dredge, get that spinner as deep into the water column as I can, engage it and reel it right through that sweet spot in the hole and see if there's anything waiting for us. Keep my line tight, keep my line tight. Boom, there's the thud. And give it a couple good reels to get the blade going. And then as soon as I feel that tension of that blade spinning, I'm just gonna do a nice slow reel, keeping it as deep as possible all the way back to my feet. Another thing I'm gonna do different here is as I'm standing in this one spot, which is that perfect angle to swing my spinner, I'm just gonna start casting about 10 feet downriver each time rather than moving with my feet and working away from the hole. I have a perfect angle here, so I'm just gonna go about 10 more feet downriver. Keep that line tight. Wait for the thud. Oh, there it is. Reel and engage. Nice slow spin all the way through that sweet spot. Okay, 10 more feet down. Reel it tight. Point your tip right at that spinner. Oh, there it is. Engage. A nice slow reel. 10 more feet down. Bump, engage, and swing. Well, my fishy friends, that is all the time we have for today. And I hope this video helps you guys get out there, utilize a new technique, and I hope it showed you that there is a style of spinner for every style of water out there. Go grab yourself a spinner, grab yourself a rod, and go catch yourself a fish. Until next time, everybody, you all stay fishy. We'll see you out there.